A Christmas Eve story of heartbreak and healing. Margaret Ellis had lived 73 years on this earth, and she thought she'd seen everything. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for what she discovered on Christmas Eve. 2003. The snow was falling softly outside her son-in-law's grand colonial home in suburban Connecticut. Through the frosted windows, she could see the warm glow of the Christmas tree, the flicker of candlelight, the shadows of family moving about in celebration. But Margaret stood on the front porch, her arms wrapped around her daughter, Rebecca, who was trembling not just from the December cold, but from something far more chilling. Rebecca was 42 years old. Beautiful, kind, devoted. She'd given everything to her marriage. 15 years of love, patience, and sacrifice. 2 wonderful children who were inside right now, laughing with their father's family, unaware that their mother was outside. In the freezing night, locked out of her own life, Margaret had arrived unannounced, wanting to surprise the family. She'd driven 3 hours from Boston, her trunk filled with carefully wrapped presents. When she pulled into the driveway, she expected squeals of delight, warm hugs, hot cocoa by the fire. Instead, she found Rebecca sitting on the porch steps, her coat wrapped tight around her shoulders, tears frozen on her cheeks. "Mama," Rebecca had whispered when she saw her mother. Just that one word, but it carried the weight of 1,000 heartbreaks. The story came out slowly, painfully. Rebecca's husband, David Charming, successful David with his real estate empire and country club memberships, had been having an affair with his secretary. How predictable, Margaret thought bitterly. How devastatingly ordinary. But what made it worse, so much worse, was that David's family knew. His mother, his sisters, his brother, they all knew. And on this Christmas Eve, they'd made their choice. When Rebecca confronted David earlier that evening, when she demanded he tell his family the truth, chaos had erupted. David's mother, Carolyn, had turned on Rebecca with a viciousness that still shocked Margaret to recall. The accusations flew. Rebecca was too focused on the children. Rebecca had let herself go. Rebecca didn't understand the pressures David faced. Rebecca should have been more accommodating. And then, the final blow. Carolyn had asked Rebecca to leave, to step outside while they celebrated Christmas. As a family, she could come back later to get the children. Maybe Rebecca had stood there, stunned, as her husband said nothing. Not one word in her defense. He just looked away, a coward wrapped in a cashmere sweater. So Rebecca had walked out into the cold and waited. For what? She didn't know, until Margaret arrived. Now, standing on that porch, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in decades. A rage so pure, so crystalline, it was almost beautiful. But beneath the rage was something else, a deep, maternal love that demanded action. She pulled Rebecca close, feeling how small her daughter had become, how diminished by cruelty and betrayal. "Listen to me, baby girl," Margaret said softly, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her. "I need you to go to my car. It's warm. The keys are in it. Lock the doors and wait for me." Rebecca pulled back, her eyes wide. "Mama, what are you going to do?" Margaret smiled then, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm going to get my grandchildren, and then I'm going to say 6 words. "What words?" "You'll hear them, honey. You'll hear them." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. She'd seen that look on her mother's face before, years ago, when a teacher had discriminated against Rebecca in school, when a landlord had tried to cheat them. Margaret Ellis was slow to anger, but once roused, she was a force of nature. Margaret watched her daughter walk to the car, then turned to face the house. Through the window, she could see them all gathered around the dining table David at the head, of course, his mother beside him, his siblings laughing at some joke. The children, her grandchildren, 8-year-old Zoe and 10-year-old Marcus, were playing near the Christmas tree. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed down her burgundy coat, and walked inside without knocking. The warmth hit her first, then the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon. For a moment, it seemed perfect, a picture of domestic bliss. Then Carolyn looked up and saw her. "Margaret," she said, the name sharp as a knife. "This is a private family celebration." Margaret didn't respond. She walked slowly through the living room, her eyes scanning for the children. Marcus saw her first. "Grandma," he shouted, running toward her. Zoe was right behind him. Margaret hugged them both, breathing in their innocence, their joy. They didn't know yet, didn't understand why Mommy wasn't here. They thought she was just in the kitchen or upstairs. "Get your coats, my loves," Margaret said gently. You're coming with Grandma and Mommy. We have a surprise for you. David stood up then, his face reddening. MOM, you can't just yet. Your coats, Margaret repeated, not looking at him. Something in her tone made the children obey without question, as they scrambled to get their winter things. Carolyn stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Margaret, there is no need for this drama. The children are perfectly happy here. Rebecca can see them tomorrow after she's... Calm down. Margaret finally turned to face her. Carolyn was 65, impeccably dressed, her face tight from too many procedures. She held herself like royalty, like someone who'd never been told no in her entire privileged life. My daughter, Margaret said quietly, was sitting outside in the freezing cold, crying. What you people celebrated? Your daughter. Carolyn snapped back. Needs to understand that marriages require work, sacrifice, understanding when a man has needs. The room went silent. Even David looked uncomfortable. Margaret felt that rage again, hot and righteous, but she kept her voice level, almost conversational. I want to tell you something, Carolyn. A story from my life. You see, I was married once too. To Rebecca's father, Thomas. He was handsome, charming, a good provider. She paused, noting how everyone was listening now. Even the siblings who'd been pretending to busy themselves. And one day, I discovered Thomas was cheating on me with his boss's wife. Could you imagine? I was 30 years old, had a 5-year-old daughter. I was scared, hurt, confused. Margaret walked slowly toward the dining table, her eyes never leaving Carolyn's face. My mother-in-law, Thomas's mother, she told me the same things you told Rebecca. Stand by your man. Be understanding. Don't make waves. After all, what would people think? She let that sink in for a moment. So you know what I did. I stayed. For 2 more years, I stayed. I tried to be more understanding, more accommodating, more everything. And you know what happened? No one answered. The children, now with their coats on, stood quietly by the door, sensing the weight of the moment. He left anyway, for someone younger. And those 2 years, I can never get them back. 2 years of my dignity, my self-respect, my peace gone. Wasted on a man who didn't deserve even 2 minutes of my time. Margaret's voice grew stronger now, filling the room. But I learned something valuable, Carolyn. I learned that some people will never see your worth. They'll take and take and take, and they'll expect you to smile while they do it. And the people who enable them, they're just as guilty. She moved closer to Carolyn now, close enough to see the older woman's carefully applied makeup, the diamonds at her throat, the designer dress, all the armor of wealth and status. You raised a cheater, Margaret said simply. A liar, a man who would break his vows and abandon his wife on Christmas Eve. And instead of teaching him accountability, you blamed the victim. You threw my daughter out into the cold, so you could pretend everything was fine. Now, wait just a minute, David started, but Margaret held up one hand, silencing him. I'm not finished. She turned back to Carolyn, and now everyone could see the tears in Margaret's eyes, not tears of weakness, but of righteous anger mixed with profound sadness. I spent 40 years alone, Carolyn. 40 years. I raised my daughter by myself. I worked 2 jobs. I sacrificed everything to give her a good life, a chance at happiness. And she found it, or so I thought. She found a man who promised to love and cherish her. She gave him 2 beautiful children. She built a home, a life. Margaret's voice broke slightly, but she pressed on. And you would destroy all of that. You would cast her out. Make her the villain in this story. Make my grandchildren choose between their parents because your son couldn't keep his pants zipped. The vulgarity of that last phrase shocked everyone, coming from this elegant, dignified woman. But that was the point. This was shocking. This was obscene. Margaret walked over to her grandchildren, placing a gentle hand on each of their shoulders. I'm taking these babies to their mother. We're going to a hotel tonight. Tomorrow, Christmas Day, we're going to celebrate as a family, a real family that loves and protects each other. And after that, she looked directly at David now, her gaze unflinching. After that, Rebecca will do what I should have done 40 years ago. She'll get a good lawyer. She'll fight for what she deserves. She'll take back her dignity and her life. David's face was pale now. His sisters exchanged glances. His mother's mouth was opening and closing like a fish. You can't just take the children, Carolyn sputtered. I am not taking them. I'm reuniting them with their mother. Their mother, who has done nothing wrong except love too much and trust blindly. Margaret guided the children toward the door, then paused. This was the moment. The 6 words she'd promised Rebecca. She turned back one final time, looking at each person in that room: David, Carolyn, the siblings, all of them complicit in their silence and cruelty. And then Margaret spoke, her voice clear and strong. You should be ashamed of yourselves. 6 words. Simple, devastating, true. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret saw Carolyn's face crumble, just slightly, saw David look away, unable to meet her eyes, saw one of the sisters wipe at her cheek. Good, let them feel it. Let them sit with it. Margaret walked out with her grandchildren, closing the door behind her. Outside, the snow was still falling, but somehow it seemed less cold now. Or maybe she was just burning too hot inside to notice. Rebecca saw them coming and jumped out of the car. The children ran to her, and she scooped them up, crying and laughing at the same time. Mama, what happened? Rebecca asked over their heads. Margaret smiled, a real smile this time. I said what needed to be said, baby. Now let's get these children somewhere warm, somewhere filled with real love. They piled into Margaret's car 3 generations, battered but not broken, as they drove away from that house with its forced cheer and hollow celebrations. Marcus piped up from the back seat. Grandma, why was everyone so quiet when we left? Margaret caught his eye in the rearview mirror. Sometimes, sweetheart, people need to hear the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. What truth did you tell them? Rebecca reached back to squeeze her son's hand, then looked at her mother with a question in her eyes. Margaret kept her eyes on the snowy road ahead. I told them they should be ashamed, because they should, that night, in a warm hotel. Sweet, they had their own Christmas celebration. Margaret had grabbed the presents from her trunk. They ordered room service, fancy hot chocolates and Christmas cookies. They watched old holiday movies, and when the children finally fell asleep, curled up together like puppies, Rebecca and Margaret sat by the window, watching the snow. I'm scared, Mama, Rebecca admitted. Of what comes next? Margaret took her daughter's hand, feeling the calluses earned from years of caring for others. I know, baby, but fear is just the beginning of courage. Tomorrow, you start rebuilding, and I'll be right there beside you. What if I'm not strong enough? You are. You know how I know. Margaret turned to face her daughter. Because you walked out of that house tonight. A weaker woman would have stayed, would have accepted their cruelty, would have pretended everything was fine. But you walked out. You chose yourself. That's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do, and you already did it. Rebecca leaned, her head on her mother's shoulder, just like she used to do as a little girl. What were those 6 words really about, Mama? It seemed like more than just the words themselves. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, thinking about her own past, her own mistakes and lessons learned. When I stayed with your father after his betrayal, I lost something precious, not just time, but a piece of myself, my self-respect, my voice. I became small and quiet, always trying to please, always walking on eggshells. And when he left anyway, I had to find myself all over again. It took years. She squeezed Rebecca's hand. Those 6 words, you should be ashamed of yourselves, they weren't just for them. They were for me too, in a way. They were all the words I wish I'd said 40 years ago. All the truth I swallowed down because I was taught to be nice, to keep the peace, to suffer in silence. But you found yourself again, Rebecca said softly. You became so strong. Yes, but I could have saved myself so much pain. If I'd just spoken up sooner. If I'd just demanded the respect I deserved. That's what I wanted for you tonight, to speak your truth before losing years to silence. They sat together in the peaceful quiet, 2 women who'd been broken by betrayal but were choosing wholeness. Outside, the city glittered with Christmas lights, each one a small promise of hope. In the days that followed, Rebecca did get a lawyer, a fierce woman named Patricia, who specialized in cases like hers. The divorce was ugly, as these things often are. David's family tried to paint Rebecca as unstable, vengeful, a bad mother. But Margaret stood firm beside her daughter, and slowly, Rebecca's voice grew stronger too. She told her story, not with shame, but with honesty. And she found, to her surprise, that people listened. Other women reached out, friends who'd gone through similar betrayals, acquaintances who'd been suffering in silence, even strangers who heard her story and found courage in it. The settlement was fair in the end. The children would split time, though they made it clear they understood what their father had done. Marcus, especially, had been old enough to piece together the truth. It hurt him, Margaret knew. It changed him, but Rebecca was there to help him process it. to show him that pain didn't have to turn into bitterness. As for Carolyn and David's family, Margaret never spoke to them again, and she was at peace with that. Some bridges need to burn, but here's what Margaret did expect. 3 months later, she received a letter. It was from David's sister, Emma. The letter was simple. Dear Margaret, I've thought about the night every day since, about what you said, about my own silence and complicity. I want you to know that I've left my own unhappy marriage. Your words gave me permission to speak my truth to. I'm ashamed it took so long. Thank you for your courage. Emma, Margaret. Read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She thought her words that night were just for Rebecca, just for her grandchildren. She hadn't realized they might ripple outward, touching other lives, giving other women permission to choose themselves. She showed the letter to Rebecca, who wept too. Do you see, baby? Margaret said. This is what happens when we speak truth. We don't just free ourselves, we free others too. A year later, on Christmas Eve, Margaret and Rebecca hosted their own celebration. Just the 3 generations: Margaret, Rebecca, Zoe, and Marcus. They cooked together, laughed together, sang carols slightly off key. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells, no swallowing down truth for the sake of false peace. As they sat around the tree, Margaret looked at her family, smaller now, but infinitely more genuine, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Complete joy, untainted by compromise or fear. Rebecca caught her eye and smiled. Thank you, Mama, for everything. For those 6 words. They were just words, baby. No. Rebecca shook her head. They were permission. Permission to value myself. Permission to demand respect. Permission to walk away from people who treat me poorly, even family. Especially family. Margaret nodded, understanding. The hardest lesson I ever learned, that love without respect isn't really love at all. Marcus, now 11 and growing into a thoughtful young man, spoke up. Grandma, can I ask you something? Anything, sweetheart. Do you think Dad will ever understand what he did wrong? It was a fair question, and Margaret considered it carefully. I don't know, Marcus. Some people learn and grow. Others just make excuses. But here's what I do know: whether he learns or not isn't your responsibility. Your responsibility is to treat people with kindness and respect, to speak truth with love, to never make someone smaller just to make yourself bigger. Is that what you did that night? Spoke truth with love? Margaret smiled. Well, maybe the love part was buried pretty deep under the anger. But yes, that's what I tried to do. Because sometimes love means holding people accountable. Real love doesn't enable cruelty. Zoe, who'd been listening quietly, added her own wisdom. Mrs. Patterson at school says that being nice and being kind aren't the same thing. Smart woman, Mrs. Patterson, Margaret said. Nice is about making people comfortable. Kind is about doing what's right, even when it's hard. As the evening wore on and the children dozed off, Rebecca and Margaret found themselves alone again, much like that first night. Do you have any regrets? Rebecca asked. About that night? About the things you said? Margaret thought about it. Did she regret the pain in Carolyn's eyes, the shock on David's face, the discomfort of his siblings? No, she said finally. Not even a little. But the only regret I have is that it took me 73 years to learn that lesson. That I can't make that same speech to my younger self. Can't tell her she deserves better. Can't save her from those wasted years. But you saved me, Rebecca said softly. You saved me from making the same mistake. And that, Margaret thought, was everything. That was the whole point. We can't undo our own past, but we can change someone else's future. We can speak the words that need to be spoken. We can stand up, even when our knees are shaking. We can choose dignity over peace, truth over comfort. Margaret looked at her daughter, still healing, still learning to trust again, but standing tall now, unbroken. You know what those 6 words really meant? Margaret asked. Tell me. They meant you matter. Your pain matters. Your dignity matters. And anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve space in your life. She paused. That's what I wish someone had told me at 30. That's what I hope every woman hears before she wastes years on someone who doesn't value her. Rebecca squeezed her mother's hand. I hear it, Mama. I hear it. Outside, snow began to fall again, just like it had a year ago. But this time, they were all inside, all warm, all together, all safe. And in that moment, Margaret Ellis understood something profound. Revenge isn't about destroying the people who hurt you. Real revenge is healing. It's thriving. It's refusing to let their cruelty make you smaller. It's 6 simple words. That change everything. You should be ashamed of yourselves, and then walking away with your head held high, knowing you'll never have to lower it for them again. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is speak truth, not loudly, not dramatically, but simply and clearly. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is the example of self-respect, even when it costs us everything comfortable and familiar. Margaret's words that Christmas Eve weren't just a rebuke, they were a legacy, a lesson, a love letter to her daughter about the value of dignity. And isn't that what we all deserve? To be loved by people who would never ask us to shrink ourselves for their comfort.